You ever wondered who decided your grass was too tall? Or why your mailbox suddenly becomes a matter of legal importance, right? Because somewhere in between community living and please remove your inflatable holiday flamingo, the Homeowners Association was born. And today, Buttercups, we're going down that suburban rabbit hole. Now, welcome back to Hark the T-Bell, where we tumble through history, culture, and the occasional chaos of modern life with a cup of curiosity and a huge splash of sass. Today's question is deceptively simple. Okay. What is an HOA and why does it feel like it has opinions about me, your mailbox, and your soul? Well, we're going to get into the quiet beginnings because we need to figure out where it started. So let's go. Oh, hey there, Buttercups. Your resident T-Bell here. Welcome to Hark the T-Bell. Let's dive in for that tea today, huh? Before HOAs had board meetings and fines, they started as something much more polite. This is actually one of the most interesting facts of the HOA history because it actually starts as a story about landscaping and neighborhood planning. And it quickly becomes a story about power, class, race, and, well, American suburbia. So, believe it or not, Buttercups, the first HOAs weren't arguing over mailbox colors or measuring your grass with a ruler. I know, shocker. They began with a dream. It was a very specific dream. A beautiful street, neatly trimmed trees, elegant homes, wide sidewalks, no factories, no smoke, and no livestock wandering down Main Street. And at first glance, it sounds charming almost. And why did they want it? Well, during the late 1800s, America was industrializing at an incredible pace. So that meant that cities were becoming crowded. Factories appeared next to homes, which I can imagine would be very frustrating. Smoke-filled neighborhoods that would alter your air quality. And railroads cut through communities. Now, wealthier families increasingly had the desire for somewhere quieter, somewhere cleaner, somewhere more orderly. And this is where developers saw an opportunity. Instead of selling lots, they could sell a lifestyle. Okay. Now, the birth of deeds restrictions. Rather than creating HOAs as we know them today, developers use something called deed restrictions. Okay. Now, think of these as permanent rules attached directly to the property itself. So if you bought the land, you also bought the rules. Now, some were practical, let's be fair. No slaughterhouses, no industrial buildings, minimum setbacks from the street. Houses must cost above a certain amount, front yards required, and certain building materials only. That seems pretty fair, right? Because now some do sound surprisingly familiar today. Okay, so keep your property maintained, obviously. Build within approved styles. Don't reduce neighborhood property values. Does that sound familiar? Well, modern HOA covenants inherited much of this DNA. But see, developers were simply not selling homes, they were selling an idealized version of life. And remember, it was the wealthy people who wanted this, right? So this movement was inspired by beautiful European neighborhoods and the belief that attractive surroundings produced healthier, happier citizens. Think large trees, parks, walking paths, curved roads, architectural harmony, every home intentionally placed. Instead of chaotic city blocks, everything felt planned. And this concept became known as the garden suburb. Early planned communities like Roland Park in Baltimore took this further, and it designed entire neighborhoods with curated beauty and shared upkeep. It was giving we are building a perfect neighborhood fantasy, but quietly controlling who got to live in it. So let's look at Roland Park, the blueprint. So it was one of the most influential examples founded in the 1890s, okay? And this is where, rather than just building nice houses, developers designed an entire experience. So this included neighborhood parks, wide boulevards, landscape requirements, architectural consistency, rules protecting property values, and shared maintenance, okay? Today, historians often describe Roland Park as one of America's first planned suburbs, and many ideas pioneered there eventually spread across the country. Now, advertisements promised something almost magical. It promised clean air and beautiful scenery, refined neighbors, safety, prestige, and order. The neighborhood itself became part of what people were buying, okay? So your investment wasn't just your house, it was everybody else's behavior. That puts a lot of pressure on people, by the way. That idea eventually became one of the biggest justifications for modern HOAs. Now, developers also realized something very important. If everyone followed the same standards, i.e., rules, homes sold for more money. This is where consistency became valuable. One neglected property could affect nearby prices, so restrictions weren't really just about beauty anymore. They had become financial tools. And protecting property values became one of the central missions of future HOAs. And that phrase still appears in governing documents today. Now, that is the more quote unquote charming part of it all. But we have reached a part of the story and it becomes less charming. Many early deed restrictions didn't stop at just architecture. They also dictated who was allowed to buy homes. Yeah, we're going where you think we're going. So some deeds did explicitly prohibit sales to Black Americans, Asian Americans, Jewish families, immigrants, other groups depending on the community. And these were known as racially restrictive covenants. And for decades, they were common across much of the United States, which is a shame. And entire neighborhoods were intentionally segregated, not by accident, but literally by design. So in 1948, everything changed because the court stepped in. The landmark Supreme case, Shelley v. Kramer, ruled that courts could not enforce racially restrictive covenants. Now, that did not erase the language from deeds overnight. Many remained written into property records for decades, and some still exist today as unenforceable historical artifacts, and that's just a reminder of communities' painful pasts. You know what I mean? Now, there's an interesting irony in this is that the same legal tools that once protected parks also protected discrimination. Now, those same documents requiring brick homes sometimes prohibited entire races from purchasing them. It's a reminder that neighborhood planning wasn't only about landscaping. It also was about who belonged. So when someone says HOA started because people wanted tidy neighborhoods, that's true. But that's only a part of the story. They were also born during a time when developers used private contracts to shape not just how the neighborhoods looked, but who was allowed to call them home. And understanding that history makes today's debates over HOAs feel a little more complicated. Now, there was a suburban boom and the rise of the HOA. When World War II ended in 1945, America had a huge housing problem. Millions of soldiers were returning home. They were getting married and starting families. They were having babies at a record pace. The baby boom wasn't just a nickname, y'all. It literally reshaped the country. So cities couldn't absorb everyone. And this is where developers began building entire neighborhoods outside urban centers. And this, again, wasn't just houses. It was entire lifestyles. Roads, sidewalks, schools, swimming pools, clubhouses, walking trails, parks, shopping centers, and probably more if they had the opportunity. It was the beginning of modern suburbia and of many, many strongly worded letters. And here's the thing. Instead of selling one lot at a time, they were developing communities from the ground up. So these neighborhoods promised something previous generations rarely had, a clean, orderly, predictable place to raise a family. Developers quickly realized something, though. Once every house was sold, who was going to maintain everything that wasn't owned by one individual? As in, who cuts the grass in the entrance? Who repairs the private roads? Who maintains that neighborhood pool they so wanted? Who would fix the streetlights and who would pay for the clubhouse roof? Now, cities did not want to absorb these private amenities because they weren't public infrastructures, okay? So developers needed to find a way to fix this because they didn't want to keep paying forever. So someone else had to take over. Well, here's where the solution came into place. Create a corporation made up of the homeowners themselves. So each homeowner would pay annual or monthly dues, elect a board of directors, vote on community issues, share responsibility for common property. On paper, it sounds incredibly reasonable. So everyone owns the amenities, everyone helps pay, everyone has a voice. And in theory, it was a neighborhood democracy. Okay? And the government loved something about this idea. Okay? Because they discovered something. If neighborhoods maintained their own roads, their own parks, drainage ponds, playgrounds, etc., cities saved an enormous amount of money, especially taxpayer money, because they did not have to expand municipal budgets. The costs shifted directly onto the homeowners. And this is especially attractive as suburbs expanded across the country. Can you imagine the cost by cities and what they would have to absorb if that was the case? Now, in many places today, local governments actually encourage or even require developers to create HOAs before approving new residential developments. And some critics argue that this represents a quiet privatization of services that previous generations expected cities or counties to provide. And honestly, those critics aren't wrong because that's kind of what they're doing. You know? Now, we talked about one very influential model in the 1800s, but one of the other most influential examples was Reston. Okay, it was founded in 1964 by developer Robert E. Simon, and Reston wasn't simply a subdivision. It was a planned community, so people could live, work, shop, walk, enjoy, go to school, enjoy parks, etc., and use shared recreational spaces all within the same community. Now, its governance structure relied heavily on resident associations responsible for maintaining common areas and community standards. So, we know that Reston wasn't the very first planned community, but it did become one of the most influential models that developers around the country studied and adapted. Now, another influential project was Columbia, and it was developed by James Rouse beginning in 1967. Columbia emphasized villages, extensive green space, and community associations that managed shared property and neighborhood services. These developments demonstrated that large-scale residential communities could operate through private governance rather than relying on local government. And then came explosive growth. Now, during the 1970s, 1980s, and especially the 1990s, HOAs exploded in popularity. Developers discovered they could build attractive neighborhoods while shifting long-term maintenance costs onto the association. Now, local governments appreciated reduced infrastructure obligations, obviously, and many buyers appreciated the neighborhood pools, tennis courts, walking trails, attractive entrances, consistent appearance, and everyone seemed to benefit. I mean, at least at first. But then came rules. Lots of rules. And some were practical. That's fair. And some were very oddly specific. Okay. Such as grass height, mailbox color, your fence style, your holiday decorations, parking, trash cans, paint colors, satellite dishes, flags, and chicken ownership. Yes. Sometimes the infamous strongly worded letter informing you that your mailbox is precisely 3 shades too beige is going to happen. That's the part most people know. But underneath those letters was something much bigger. It was a private government with elected officials, budgets, contracts, bylaws, elections, committees, and lawyers. And in many states, the legal authority to place liens on your home if dues go unpaid, unfortunately. That is a level of power many homeowners don't fully appreciate until they're, living under it already. Now, what started as a practical solution for mowing the neighborhood lawn started to slowly evolve into one of the most widespread forms of private governance in America. Today, millions of people live under HOA rules, often with more day-to-day interaction with their HOA board rather than their own city council. Now, By this point, Buttercups, we've learned that HOAs didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were not just wearing reflective safety vests and carrying a violation book notice. Okay, got it. They evolved from private deed restrictions, exploded alongside post war suburbia, and eventually became responsible for managing entire neighborhoods. So the real question becomes, why do they still exist given everything? Because despite all the memes and horror stories, HOAs were created to solve real problems. But as with many systems involving rules, money, and, well, humans, things can get complicated. Now, let's be fair to the HOA before we roast it over the neighborhood barbecue spit, that there are actually some pros, okay? Because at their core, most HOAs are nonprofit corporations created to manage the common property and enforce common standards that individual homeowners couldn't easily maintain on their own. I mean, imagine buying a home in a neighborhood with a community pool, walking trails, playgrounds, and ponds, entrance landscaping, private roads, and neighborhood clubhouses. Someone has to mow the grass. Someone has to repair the sidewalks, and someone has to replace the pool pump when it gives up after years of children pretending they're Olympic swimmers. And that's where the HOA does come in. They are maintaining these things. And one of an HOA's biggest responsibilities is caring for areas that belong to everyone rather than one homeowner. So we've talked about the pools, parks, clubhouses, tennis or pickleball courts, walking trails, lakes or ponds, gates, community security systems, and sidewalks, streetlights, private roads, and the landscaping at neighborhood entrances. Now, without a central organization collecting dues for this, these amenities would fall into disrepair or require the city to take over. And that's something a lot of municipalities won't do for private developments. Now, another goal is to preserve a consistent appearance throughout the neighborhood. So yeah, that means rules about things like, I don't know, lawn maintenance, exterior home keep-up, fencing, roofing materials, landscaping, visible storage, abandoned vehicles, etc. And that philosophy is fairly straightforward. If everyone maintained their property reasonably well, the entire neighborhood remains attractive. And that allows to protect property values, right? And that's a big selling point, probably the biggest for an HOA. Developers, lenders, and many homeowners believe that consistent maintenance will help stabilize and might even increase property values. And the reasoning kind of goes like this. Well, if one homeowner lets their yard become a jungle, paints the house neon green, and parks 6 broken vehicles in the driveway while storing a boat on the front lawn, that's going to influence how buyers can perceive the entire neighborhood, right? Now, whether every HOA rule actually improves property values can be debated, but maintaining common areas and preventing severe neglect generally contributes to the neighborhood appeal. Now, here's the thing. Remember that a lot of local governments do not want to take on the cost of these proper neighborhoods. So many newer developments include infrastructure that cities never intend to maintain. So that responsibility actually shifts to HOA. And that can include like your stormwater systems, retention ponds, private roads, your drainage, streetlights, sidewalks, landscaping, and security gates. So in many communities, without the HOA collecting dues and organizing that maintenance, these shared facilities simply wouldn't function. And you know what? It's also, if you're looking at pro, it's also allowing you to build a community. Because some associations also organize events that help neighbors actually get to know each other and continue to know one another. So think like holiday decorating contests, food truck nights, neighborhood yard sales, pool parties and movie nights and community newsletters and welcome committees. When an HOA is well managed, right, it can create a stronger sense of neighborhood in rather than simply enforcing rules. Now, in the absolute best case scenario, an HOA feels less like a tiny government and more like the mildly stern but incredibly organized neighbor who always has the nicest flowers and somehow remembers everyone's birthday. Now, here's the thing. There's a good and bad to everything. So, of course, we have to go now to the cons of the HOA. This is why things get, well, where things get a little spicy. Because let's discuss why HOAs have become the stars of countless internet horror stories. All right? Because we have talked about why they sound reasonable, but it's the execution that can determine if it is or not. Okay? And it depends on the people entirely running it. And humans, well, humans are wonderfully imperfect. Okay? So, rules can feel very personal, right? Many HOA rules regulate things homeowners often see as expressions of individuality. Woohoo. And that's fair. Like, depending on the community, restrictions might cover exterior paints, holiday decorations, flag displays, mailbox styles, fences, sheds, basketball hoops, landscaping choices, vegetable gardens, satellite dishes, clotheslines, etc., and outdoor furniture. For some homeowners, these rules create visual harmony, and for others, not so much. It feels like someone else is decorating their house and they have no say. And that's fair. So many HOAs regulate activities that people assume are purely personal decisions, right? And that's understandable. So cool rules can involve overnight street parking, RV or boat storage, pet breeds or the number of pets, noise levels, home businesses, short-term rentals, rental limits, exterior lighting, and architectural changes. Now, sometimes these rules prevent genuine neighborhood conflicts, yes, but other times they become the source of them. Now, the monthly dues. HOAs are funded primarily through assessments, better known as, dues. And these payments help cover landscaping, insurance, maintenance, reserve funds for future repairs, management companies, legal expenses, and utilities shared for, the shared properties. But they do vary dramatically. Now, some neighborhoods only charge a couple $100s a year. That's not terrible. Luxury communities with expensive amenities, though, can charge hundreds or even thousands each month. And unlike Netflix, this is not exactly a subscription you can casually cancel while keeping all the benefits. Because here's the thing. If rules aren't followed, HOAs have the authority to issue warning letters, monetary fines, suspension of amenity access, legal action, liens against property for unpaid assets, and foreclosure in certain circumstances for unpaid dues or judgments, depending on state law. Which to me is part of the reason that I would not want to be in an HOA. So we will be fair to say that most HOAs do not leap straight to severe penalties, but because they're legal corporations with governing authority established through recorded covenants, they possess enforcement powers that many homeowners don't fully appreciate until they receive that first letter. Now, emotionally, receiving an HOA violation notice can feel less like a constructive feedback thing and more like receiving a breakup letter from your landscaping. You're in violation of Section 4.3.2, unsanctioned mailbox enthusiasm. Is that an actual rule? Probably not. Does it feel plausible? Absolutely. Now, perhaps the biggest surprise for new homeowners is discovering that an HOA is at its heart a mini democracy. Board members are often volunteers elected within the neighborhood. Okay, now, that means that your neighbors make decisions, your neighbors enforce the rules, your neighbors interpret governing documents, and sometimes that's fantastic if you have good neighbors. And sometimes it's basically city council with better landscaping and considerably more discussion about shrubbery. Board meetings can be passionate because issues are personal. After all, you're not debating some distant government policy. You're debating whether Steve can keep his trailer in the driveway. Now, why do they feel so intense? Well, because it's fascinating. Because it's not really about the grass. It's what the grass represents. I think HOAs are women. Just saying. Every disagreement over a mailbox, fence, or flower bed often reflects something deeper, right? Who gets to decide what a neighborhood should look like? How much freedom should homeowners have? What responsibilities come with living in a shared community? And when does protecting everyone become controlling individuals? Now, HOAs exist at the intersection of money, shared property, personal experience, governance, and neighbor-to-neighbor relationships. Because your home isn't just an investment. It's where you live, it's where you express yourself, it's where your family builds memories. So when you have another organization or person telling you what color your front door can be, or how tall your grass can grow, it doesn't feel like a maintenance issue. It can feel personal. And that's why HOA disputes often become emotional far more quickly than disagreements over other contracts. And I don't blame them. I would never own a house in an HOA. No one is telling me what I can do in my own house if I have found the time, the financial stability, and all that to own my own house. I'm just saying. Now, at their best, HOAs preserve neighborhoods, protect shared investments, and foster community, yes. At their worst, they become cautionary tales about bureaucracy, selective enforcement, and neighborhood power struggles. And somewhere in between, most HOAs are simple groups of ordinary neighbors just trying to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, while hoping nobody starts a 47 email thread about mailbox flowers. Now, I decided to tumble down this rabbit hole because I was listening to the radio and I heard somebody say something to the effect of his friend was in the HOA, and that his neighbor, I believe, needed a roof, and that all the neighbors had to pitch in to help with this roof out of the blue. Absolutely not. Your neighbor, if they need a roof, can figure out a way to finance it, which is why I thought, I wonder what the origins of the HOA are, and here we are, continuing to tumble. Now, let's look at the hidden machinery of HOAs, or let's go behind the gates. Now, HOA life often looks like tidy sidewalks and matching mailboxes. But behind the scenes, it's a mix of legal documents, financial spreadsheets, social politics, and the occasional turf war over garden gnomes. Let's hope in the heavily laminated binder, which I would truly appreciate, just saying. Now, the rule book nobody reads, the CC and R, or Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Now, this is the HOA's constitution, except nobody remembers voting for it, and almost nobody reads it until it's too late. So the CC and Rs are long, dense legal documents that dictate everything from paint colors to parking angles, to whether your holiday inflatables are spiritually too festive. Well, they're so long and complicated because they're trying to cover every possible homeowner scenario. Think chaos scenarios too, such as 3 boats and a trampoline. They're trying to protect property values through strict uniformity, ick, and legally shield the HOA from disputes. I guess that's what you're doing, I guess. Now, translation is a rulebook written to anticipate future arguments with your neighbor Gary. Now, I definitely agreed to this illusion. Most homeowners receive documents in a stack of closing paperwork. You skim it at best and sign it because, well, closing day is chaos. Then the reality arrives later. Wait, I can't do what to my fence? Now, then there's the fine print betrayal moment. This is where HOA life becomes a slow burning plot twist. You thought you owned your home? Nah, you actually own a home inside a legally governed microstate. I don't like that. Now, following the money, where your HOA dues actually go, HOA dues aren't just fees. They're the fuel that keeps a neighborhood machine running. So, maintenance versus management. Maintenance is like landscaping, roads, pools, lighting, etc. Management fees are something along the lines of administrative work, contracts, legal compliance, and billing systems. Now, their reserve funds, the please don't break anything big fund, right? This is money that they save for long-term repairs. So, roof replacements, road resurfacing, pool construction. Now, when the reserves are healthy, things are going to go more smoothly, obviously. When they're not, surprise assessments appear like plot twists nobody asked for. And of course, those fines will probably pop up. Just saying. Now, let's look at the financial health versus quiet decline. All right, what warning shots should you be looking for? Well, those include deferred maintenance everywhere, frequent special assessments, and dues rising faster than neighborhood gossip. Ooh. It's fact, though, right? Now, the HOA board. The democracy was a drama club. Now, technically, HOA boards are volunteer-run democracy. Practically, it's a neighborhood micro sitcom with bylaws. And you just have to hope the right neighbors get on it, okay? What board life actually looks like? Well, volunteers trying to enforce rules they didn't fully read either. Passive aggressive email threads that could win awards for tone management. Meetings that somehow last 90 minutes to decide on mailbox color samples. Now, your common dynamics. The we must preserve aesthetics member. Yeah. The this violates section 12.4.3 rule lawyer. Yeah. And the exhausted mediator who just wants everyone to agree on shrubs. This is where you can see that burnout is real. See, board members often leave due to constant neighborhood conflict, that's obvious, time demands, duh, and being yelled at over trash cans. I mean, if you're going to be a part of it, you have to take the good and the bad. Just saying. It's government, but with mulch related stress. Now, your violation notices. The greatest hits of HOA enforcement. Now, this is their most iconic genre, the violation notice. Common chart toppers include trash cans visible for 12 minutes too long, the wrong shade of beige, a crime against subtlety, holiday decorations staying up 48 hours past the emotional deadline, and basketball hoops existing in a state of moral controversy. Oh, let's not forget that long grass that is either too tall or suspiciously adjudged for being too green. All ridiculous. Okay, that's all ridiculous. And this is where HOAs become legendary because small aesthetic choices lead to formal letters that leads to escalating tension worthy of a drama series. Now, why do we obey these what can be very stupid rules? Okay, like the psychology of neighborhood rules. Why do we obey this? HOAs don't really just rely on enforcement. I mean, that would be difficult. They rely on human psychology. So social pressure is actually greater than legal pressure. Most compliance comes from people not wanting to be that house, fear of neighbor judgment, and desire for harmony or, the avoidance of conflict. Now, that the fine versus the actual feeling you get when you get that fine. So people are going to fear fines, but even more they fear embarrassment. And here's the thing. HOAs amplify a simple truth. People behave differently when their environment is constantly watching. It's soft surveillance through landscaping standards. All right, Buttercups, we've now established a few things about the HOA. It can issue rules, collect debts, and occasionally send letters that read like they were written by someone who has a personal vendetta against your inflatable holiday decorations. Or maybe just anybody's. It doesn't really matter. So here's the question that may keep homeowners up at night. Do I actually have any rights? And the answer is absolutely. Now, living in an HOA does not mean you surrender all control over your property. When you buy into a homeowners association, you're entering a legal agreement, but that agreement comes with both responsibilities and protections. The tricky part, those rights vary depending on your state's laws, your HOA's governing documents, and federal protections that apply nationwide. Let's unpack it. Now, first things first, read the fine print. Every HOA operates under a hierarchy of governing documents. Think of them as the Constitution. You know that laminated binder we talked about? Yeah, that thing. Now, Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC&Rs, the legally recorded rules attached to the property. There's bylaws, how the association operates, elects board members, and conducts meetings. Articles of Incorporation, so that establishes the HOA as a nonprofit corporation in many states. And of course, the rules and regulations, which are the day-to-day policies adopted by the board. Now, when you purchase a home in an HOA, bless you, these documents become a part of your ownership. That means the rules aren't something the HOA invents after you move in. They generally disclose them during the home buying process, although many home buyers just don't realize how important they are until it's too late, honestly. Now, homeowners have voting rights. One of the misconceptions, probably one of the biggest ones, is that the HOA board simply appoints itself, and it's not true. In most associations, the homeowners elect the board. So, yeah. Now, all owners often have the right to vote in board elections, vote on amendments to governing documents, attend annual meetings, participate in discussions, run for the board themselves, and petition for special meetings under certain conditions. Now, in other words, if you don't like how your HOA is being managed, you might have the opportunity to become part of the solution. Though, fair warning, you'll probably discover why board members suddenly become very interested in landscaping budgets. Just to be fair. Now, in many states, homeowners have legal rights to inspect certain association records, okay? And these include, often, your financial statements, annual budgets, reserve studies, your meeting minutes, your governing documents, insurance information, and contracts with vendors. And that's a very big right, because that would help you figure out if your HOA is on the straight and narrow or if they're going rogue. Now, transparency helps homeowners understand where your dues are going, how the money is being spent, and whether the association is financially healthy. And it also lets you know how major decisions are being made. So that does help put you at ease. Now, some records may be restricted to protect privacy. For example, personnel matters, attorney-client or communications, or information about other homeowners' delinquent accounts. That makes sense. You can see the big picture stuff, but when it comes down to specific people, they still have their privacy. Now, you have the right to know how your money is used, because HOA dues aren't supposed to disappear into a mysterious black hole and never be seen again. Now, boards genuinely have fiduciary duties, meaning they're expected to act in the best interest of the association. This means that you should really vote on the right person, not just the person that everybody wants. And they may be one and the same, and they may not. Now, many states require annual budgets, financial disclosures, reserve planning, independent audits or reviews, so that depends on the association's size or governing documents, and notice before major assessments. This allows the homeowner to better understand both routine spending and long-term spending for expensive repairs. Things like roofs, roads, or pools. Now, due process before penalties. Contrary to popular belief, most HOAs can't simply wake up one morning and decide, you know what, we're going to fine Susan $500 because her mailbox looked at us funny. Thankfully, in many states, homeowners are entitled to some form of due process before certain enforcement actions. This may include written notice of the alleged violation, time to correct the issue, an opportunity for the ability to present evidence, and written notice of the board's decision. So again, just like you go to court, they're giving you your due process. And exactly what is required varies by state law and the association's governing documents. So if you're going to join an HOA, which I wouldn't recommend, but if you do, figure these things out before you do it. Now, the right to challenge HOA decisions. Sometimes we can appeal, and homeowners really aren't always stuck accepting every single board decision. It also depends on your state law and governing documents. So owners might actually be able to appeal violations, request hearings, participate in mediation, and seek arbitration. Now, they might also be able to file lawsuits when appropriate. They can vote to remove board members, and they can challenge elections. It's also in their right to amend governing documents through the required voting process. Okay? Most legal experts recommend attempting internal resolution before you head to court, because litigation can be expensive for both homeowners and associations. And unfortunately, associations may have more funds and more connections. Not saying that they're always going to win, just to be clear. It's still one of those things that you just want to be careful. Now, there are federal rights, because living in an HOA does not erase your federal legal protections. Please remember that. Now, HOAs generally must comply with laws such as the Fair Housing Act. This prohibits discrimination based on protected characteristics. The Americans with Disabilities Act In certain contexts, though its application to HOAs is more limited than many people assume. So if you're going to look into that, definitely get your, everything down. The Fair Housing Amendments Act. This may require reasonable accommodations or modifications for residents with disabilities. And there are other applicable federal and state civil rights laws. For example, an HOA generally cannot enforce rules in a discriminatory manner or refuse certain legally required accommodations simply because they dislike them. So, you have federal protections. Just make sure you know what they are before you go up against them if you do. Now, remember we said that federal laws can override some HOA rules and laws or whatever? Well, so can state laws. All right? Now, not HOA rule automatically wins. Okay? Something you might not know. Many state legislatures have passed laws limiting what HOAs can regulate. Now, depending on the state, homeowners may have a statutory protection involving solar panels, political signs, election signs, American flags, religious displays, clotheslines, native landscaping, drought-resistant yards, electric vehicle charging stations, service animals, backyard gardens, and rain barrels. Now, some states have expanded these protections significantly in recent years as legislatures balance private community governance with individual property rights. Okay? Now, we as homeowners have responsibilities too. And I mean, I'm not actually a part of the we, but I'm also not a part of the HOA. So we just know that rights comes with responsibilities, okay? Now, when you purchase a home in an HOA, you are generally agreeing to paying assessments on time, following recorded covenants, maintaining your property, obtaining architectural approval when required, respecting common areas, and following community procedures. Ignoring the governing documents because I didn't know is rarely a successful legal defense, okay? Courts generally treat recorded covenants as binding contracts that buyers accept when you purchase that property. So you have to wonder who really has the power. And the fascinating part is that people often think that HOAs are all powerful. Others think homeowners should be able to do absolutely anything they want on property they own. And you should, to a degree, but in an HOA, there's got to be a compromise. And so reality sits somewhere in the middle. HOAs have authority, but not unlimited authority, okay? And homeowners have rights, but not unlimited freedoms. So this relationship is really going to work best when you have governing documents that are clear, communication is transparent, rules are applied consistently and to everyone, finances are responsibly managed, and homeowners stay involved instead of tuning out until something goes wrong. Because the biggest irony of this all is that many people are frustrated with their HOA, have never attended a board meeting, voted in an election, or read the CCR. It's a bit like complaining about the ending of a movie you walked out of halfway through. So if you're going to complain, okay, then you need to actually put some effort into the HOA. And if you don't want to go to these things and you don't want to be a complainer, then just don't buy into it, okay? Here's your biggest takeaway, though. Here's your biggest sip of tea, Buttercups. Your HOA isn't just their organization. It is yours, too. The board works for the association. The association is made up of the homeowners, which means your voice does matter, but only if you choose to use it. Sometimes the most powerful tool a homeowner has isn't just hiring a lawyer. It's showing up to the next meeting, preferably with a copy of the governing documents and a healthy appreciation for Robert's Rules of Order. And then, here's the thing. Once you start pulling on the thread of homeowner rights, you realize that this whole system has a lot more moving parts than most people expect. It's really not just rules versus residents. It's law, money, enforcement, and everyday life, all tangled in the same neighborhood ecosystem. So here's the thing. This is where things get really interesting, and where these questions naturally start to surface. And you say, what questions? And I'm going to throw those out there at you. Can an HOA really foreclose on a home, and under what circumstances? That would be something as a homeowner you would want to know. What happens if an HOA board ignores its governing documents? That's where, when you have access to minutes and all the documents and all the information that we talked about earlier, you can use that to your advantage. How often do homeowners successfully challenge HOA decisions in court? Well, that would be something you would want to look up too. What rights do renters have in HOA communities? Well, that's a really good question. You should probably look that up before you either decide to rent in an HOA community or you decide to rent out with your house in an HOA community. How do homeowner protections differ from state to state? Well, that is where you need to go and do your research and figure out what state you're looking for. What are the biggest myths people believe about HOAs? And you know what? That would be an interesting one and probably, that'd probably be kind of funny in a way. What happens when the HOA itself violates the law? Well, I guess you'll have to figure it out, huh? Okay, so homeowners associations, HOAs, are not a universal idea. They're a cultural and legal design choice. The US model is one of the most expansive in the world, but other countries either scale it differently or handle shared spaces through government, municipalities, or just very different ownership systems. So we're going to expand from HOA drama in suburbia, aka USA, to a global housing reality check. Okay? So, the US is an HOA superpower. The HOA superpower. All right? Now, we know that HOAs are deeply embedded in suburban development, especially in newer housing. Some of the key characteristics that we've already seen is that they are common in planned communities and subdivisions. They often are mandatory if you buy into the development, so you don't have a choice. They're governed by CCRs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Now, they are responsible for, say, landscaping rules, exterior home experience, amenities, your pools, parks, gyms, etc., and your fines and, well, enforcement power. Now, why is it so strong in the USA? Because suburban boom after World War II, when all the soldiers were coming back, the millions, and the baby boom happened. Developers offloading maintenance costs because they didn't want to pay for it once they were done and sold the houses. Municipalities outsourcing services to private associations, i.e., they did not want to pay for it either. And property value protection ideology. Now, that's the US, and we've talked a lot about them. In Canada, it's condos over HOAs. So the equivalent system exists, but it's more commonly tied to condominiums rather than entire neighborhoods. So you have your condo corps managing shared buildings. So their rules focus on interior unit boundaries versus shared spaces, maintenance fees, and building repairs and reserves. So it's less common for single-family suburban divisions compared to the US. So it's the Canadian version is more building governance than neighborhood policy. The UK, leasehold and management companies. So in the United Kingdom, HOAs as Americans know them are rare. So many properties in the UK are leasehold, they're not freehold. A management company handles shared gardens, hallways, and roofs, and building insurance. Residents may have limited control depending on lease structure. The key difference? Less neighborhood-wide rule enforcement, more landlord-style structure than community governance. All right. In Germany, they have WEG, Community Ownership Model. Okay. So their shared housing is governed through WEG. And it's a community of apartment owners. And y'all, I am not saying this word. It's got a lot of letters. It's in German. And it's, wow, I'm going to butcher it. But the WEG, you'll be able to look it up. Their legal framework defines voting rights, maintenance obligations, and shared ownership rules. Now, what stands out here is highly regulated and legally structured, less arbitrary rulemaking, and strong homeowner protections under civil law. Now, we're traveling to Australia where they have strata title living. So, that has common in apartments and townhouses. So, it's for townhouses and apartments. Owners belong to a body corporate or owners corporation, and responsibilities include maintenance of common areas, insurance, and bylaw enforcement. The tone difference is that it's more bureaucratic than emotional, and less neighborhood identity policing, more property management focus. Now, we're going on over to Japan, and they have a mansion management association. Okay, so I'm going to call it MMA to be easy. Now, shared apartment buildings or mansions are managed through resident associations, professional management companies, and strong emphasis on cleanliness, noise control, and recycling systems. Now, their cultural angle is more towards rules tend to be social harmony driven than punitive, and less confrontation, more collective responsibilities. Now, you're going to wonder, well, where do HOAs not really exist? And in many countries where, especially where housing is older and more state managed, that's where you're not going to see them. So there's neighborhood-wide private governance and commons is there, okay? Public municipalities include like handling roads, waste collection, zoning enforcement. And property rules are often embedded in your national civil codes, rental ownership law, local government regulations. So instead of hearing your HOA will find you, it becomes your city ordinance applies. Now, let's look at the big picture takeaway for this specific. HOAs are not inevitable, okay? They are a specific solution to housing, development, and government structure in the U.S. Now, elsewhere, the same problems exist: maintenance, shared spaces, community rules, but it's the authority layer that changes. So in the U.S., it's those private corps. In Germany, it's legal frameworks. In the U.K., it's landlord-style systems. And in many other countries, it's municipal governance. And this is why HOAs are less of a universal system and more of a cultural experiment that's got really, really big in one place. Okay, so we've talked about why the HOAs exist. We've talked about why people defend them or criticize them. Now it's time for the reason half of you clicked on this episode. The stories. Or rather, we're going to spill the tea. Okay? Because if the internet has taught us anything, it says somewhere in America, at this very moment, someone is arguing over the exact shade of beige that a mailbox is legally allowed to be. Now, before we dive in, we have one important disclaimer. Not every viral HOA story is exactly as it first appears. News headlines often simplify complicated disputes, and every story has multiple perspectives. Still, many of these cases are well documented through court records, investigation, reporting, and extensive local news coverage. And they reveal just how complicated life in a governed community can become. So let's look at a few of the most famous examples. If there's one thing HOAs and holiday enthusiasts have been debating for decades, it's Christmas lights. Across the country, homeowners have received violation notices over displays that stayed up too long after the holidays, decorations considered too large, inflatable decorations, they'd hate my yard, excessive lighting, music synchronized to light shows, that's awesome, I don't know why they were upset about it, and extension cords visible from the street. The usual conflict isn't just about Christmas itself, right? It's about balancing individual celebration with neighborhood standards, safety concerns, traffic congestion, and aesthetics. But if you've ever spent 12 hours untangling lights only to receive a violation letter, you're not going to feel very festive, are you? Now, the 50 Shades of Beige problem. Many HOAs require homeowners to obtain approval before repainting their homes. Now, that could sound reasonable until you discover there are only 6 approved colors, and 5 of them are different versions of beige. Bite me. Across the United States, homeowners have fought over front doors painted bright colors, modern black exteriors, historic color palettes, garage doors, trim colors, and decorative shutters. Some communities even require submitting paint samples weeks in advance. Now imagine explaining to your friends, I'm waiting for the committee approval before I can paint my mailbox. No thank you. The driveway drama. Now, one of the most common sources of HOA conflict isn't landscaping, it's parking. Now, rules often regulate overnight street parking, commercial vehicles, boats, RVs, trailers, inoperable vehicles, and guest parking. Now, for neighborhoods with narrow streets or limited parking, these rules can genuinely improve safety and they're reasonable. But they also generate some of the most complaints. Nothing says welcome to suburbia quite like receiving a warning because your guest stayed one night longer than expected. Maybe they were just having a good time, HOA. Now, chickens, goats, and the great backyard farm debate. The rise of backyard homesteading has collided head on with HOA regulations, and honestly, it's no surprise. Across America, homeowners have disputed rules involving chickens, ducks, beekeeping, miniature goats, vegetable gardens, and compost bins. Now, one person's sustainable lifestyle is another person's concern about noise, odors, or neighborhood appearance. The result? Some very surprisingly passionate debates whether Henrietta the chicken counts as livestock or a beloved pet. And that is a fair thing to debate. I'm just saying. And then the lawn that launched a lawsuit. Grass. Just grass. Except it isn't just grass. Many HOA disputes begin with lawns that are too short, too tall, too brown, too full of weeds, replaced with native plants, converted into drought-resistant landscaping, turned into pollinator gardens. I mean, what do you people want? In recent years, homeowners advocating for environmentally friendly landscaping have occasionally clashed with HOA rules written decades earlier, before water conservation and native habitats became major priorities. Now, some states have even passed laws limiting an HOA's ability to protect certain winter saving or environmentally beneficial landscaping practices. Okay? So, yes, your lawn can become a legal issue. And now, states are trying to limit the HOA's ability to prohibit some of those things. Now, flags, signs, and freedom of expression. Yes, an HOA takes away all of that. But let's look at another recurring source of conflict involving what homeowners display outside their homes. Now, disputes have centered around political signs, holiday decorations, which we talked about, religious displays, sports flags, military flags, pride flags, garden signs, and window displays. Now, these cases often raise difficult questions about freedom of expression, private contracts, and community standards. Because while the First Amendment limits government action, HOAs are genuinely private associations operating under contractual agreements. Now, although federal and state laws can protect certain displays, such as the U.S. flag or satellite dishes, many states have enacted additional protections for political signs or solar energy devices. Now, we have talked about these disagreements, but what happens when the HOA goes to court? Because some disagreements don't end with warning letters. They end up in court. Now, HOAs across the country have been involved in lawsuits, oh my goodness, over some of the silliest stuff. Selective enforcement. Failure to maintain common areas, that's what you're there for. Financial transparency, Election disputes, duh. Accessibility accommodations, like, come on, y'all. Keep it fair. Architectural approvals, I mean, now I get it. Fair housing issues, foreclosures for unpaid assessments, fiduciary responsibility of board members. Y'all, these are all things that they're meant to uphold. And of course, when they don't, they should go to court. Many of these cases have shaped HOA law and clarified the limits of association authority. Now, while they're less flashy than mailbox controversies, they're often far more significant. And then the internet changed everything. 25 years ago, an HOA dispute might have stayed inside one neighborhood. Not today! Someone posts the violation letter online, it gets shared, then someone on TikTok dramatically reads it aloud, which I'm just saying, read alouds are fun. The lawyers weigh in on YouTube, and then Reddit spends 3 days debating whether the mailbox was really architecturally incompatible. Social media has transformed neighborhood disagreements into national entertainment, but it's also increased transparency.
That's helped homeowners better understand their rights and encourage some associations to reconsider overly rigid policies. Y'all, social media, while it can be your frenemy, is going to help in this situation because they can't hide behind no documentation. They cannot hide behind those gates anymore. Now it's easy to laugh at these stories, and honestly, some of them can be very ridiculous and hilarious. But beneath every viral headline, beneath every situation is a deeper question. How much control should a community have over individual homeowners? Every famous HOA story tends to revolve around one or more of these themes: individual freedom versus collective standards, property rights versus contractual obligations, financial responsibility versus homeowner expectations, neighborhood appearance versus personal expression, and volunteer leadership versus professional governance. This is why HOA stories are so emotionally charged. They're rarely just about decorations or chickens or beige paint. Those are just the big things that kind of set it off. They're about people trying to define what it means to share a community while still feeling at home in their own home. And somewhere, there's probably still a board meeting discussing mailbox flowers. Now, here's the thing, Buttercups. The wildest HOA stories aren't about petty neighbors. They're about the fascinating tension between order and freedom. Most of us want beautiful neighborhoods, and most of us want to make our own choices. But finding that balance, that's where the drama begins. Because every rule was written after somebody did something. And somewhere there's a committee saying, we've never thought we'd have to write a bylaw about inflatable dragons. And if I had to stay in an HOA, I might be one of those people. Because I like inflatable stuff and I like dragons. Now, before you sign on the dotted line and call it home sweet home, there's always a final question worth sitting on before you do this. When an HOA is actually worth it? When does it start flashing red flags instead of reassurance? And what should you really be looking for before you commit? Because HOAs aren't automatically the enemy or the hero. They can bring structure, shared upkeep, and community standards, but they can also drift into overreach if no one's paying attention to the fine print. So can we consider HOA villains? Not exactly. Are they saints? Positively not. They land somewhere in between. A system built to maintain order that sometimes forgets people living inside it aren't just zoning guidelines with emotions attached. And that's the real takeaway. Before you buy in, you're not just buying a house. You're literally buying into a rule book, a culture, and a shared agreement about what neighborhood, I put that in air quotations, even means. And Buttercups, that is how we go from lovely planned communities to debating whether a garden gnome violates Section 7.1 aesthetic harmony, blah, blah, blah. Now, if this little dive into suburban structure and quiet chaos sparked something for you, stick around. There are always other rabbit holes waiting, another history thread to tug, and oddly specific systems to unpack. Until next time, keep your grass trimmed, your curiosity messy, and your HOA approval forms pre-approved. Buttercups, I thank you for listening and for being a part of this journey with me. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you have a great week ahead. Now, should you have any questions, comments, or, maybe future topics, you can email me at harktisthetbell@gmail.com. You can locate me on Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube. And please remember that this is a one-woman show. So, as we go on this journey together, you are growing as I grow. But until next time, Buttercups.